So I said, Brandon, is it okay if I make my character a vampire and not tell the others? Because I thought that would be the funniest thing ever, and just overall be very interesting. And he said yes. So I set to work on doing that, and I had to write up vampire rules for this game as well, and I made them exactly as granular and as pain in the butt for the player and the vampire character as possible.
Welcome to Tabletop Talk, a podcast where I talk to creatives in tabletop gaming about more than what they make. I focus on how and why they create. Do you enjoy discovering the creative process that brings your favorite games to the table? Well, guess what? You're in the right place. I want you to enjoy this interview with Addison Goff, one of the creators of Eureka, Investigative Urban Fantasy. In this interview, we talk about the shortcomings he felt existed in Call of Cthulhu and Trail of Cthulhu that he believes his game overcomes. We get into key roles that they added to the development team that allowed them to go to crowdfunding. And last but not least, we talk about an old video game and how that game did something that really impressed him. Okay, sit back, relax, never hide a clue behind a roll, and enjoy my time with Addison.
This is Barney from Parable Games. When I'm not making terrifying role-playing games, I'm listening to Tabletop Talk.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Today, my guest is Addison Goff of ANIM, which stands for Agency of Narrative Intrigue and Mystery. AMIN is a small TTRPG studio based in the southern U.S., and their debut game is Eureka, Investigative Urban Fantasy. Addison has 3 years of game experience behind them and is backed by 10 years of playing and running games and lives in Louisiana for most of their life. So, Addison, welcome to the third floor.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So, Addison, I'm going to subject you to the question you get the first time you come onto a podcast, and that's going to be about your origin story. But I'm going to try to phrase it a little bit different, if that's okay.
Okay.
There was a day you knew nothing about this hobby. So you didn't know about a character sheet, funky dice, and pretending to be other people, and it was put in front of you for the very first time. Can you take me back there?
That is correct. Well, you can't. You always kind of know about it. You always kind of know it exists if you're following any other pop culture because it'll just be referenced. But the first time I ever played a TTRPG was when I was a freshman in college, 2014 or 2015. And my friends Elizabeth and Jared invited me to a 3.5e Dungeons & Dragons game.
Nice.
And that group was pretty loose with the rules. Of course, I didn't know that at the time because when someone introduces you to Dungeons & Dragons, they don't tell you to read the rule book. They just start telling you rules.
Yep.
And whether they're correct or not, you have no way of knowing. But I still had a really great time, and even after the first session, I was hooked.
Why were you hooked? Addison, what was it that hooked you?
I really enjoyed the let's see, how do I put this into word? I guess the freedom of it in such a way that when you've got a video game, the solutions to any given problem are at least somewhat programmed in. You can't come up with a solution, in most games at least, that the game designer didn't think of. As well as it's even harder to come up with a solution that is potentially somewhat diplomatic, just because, again, video games, at least most, are not advanced enough to take your dialogue and write script based on it. And the few times that it has been attempted have been disasters. So that is part of what hooked me. And that's one thing that I really especially like about it. As well as another thing I really like about it is the accessibility of working within it.
How so?
Because if you have a video game and you're like, I don't like how this one part of this video game plays, you have to you would have to know how to program to change that. But for a tabletop RPG, you just kind of have to know how to write and do some math. And that does lead to a lot of bad games because anyone can do it. But the fact that anyone could do it means that there's not a barrier to entry.
It's interesting you say that, Addison, because I've never really thought about really the freedom that we get from being able to house rule or make a call in the spot compared to other games, right? Like if you do that in a board game, in a lot of cases, it'll break the game. Because the board game has got a very specific set of gears that mesh together. And if you start changing rules, you're going outside of the design space, right? Whereas in RPGs...
And I think that that's also true of RPGs quite often.
How so?
That if you change one thing and it turns out to have been something very important, the whole thing breaks. I guess the difference being that you've got a game master who is an intelligent person who can pull the brakes on that when it's about to go off the rails.
Yeah, but to your point, like unlike say a video game, that can all be done on the fly, right? That can all be done very quickly. I don't think I've ever fully thought of it that way. So you enjoy your first game of D&D. Were you an addict at that point? Like, I just need this in my veins, or did you leave it and come back later? Like, give me a sense of your pathway.
Yeah, that group eventually fell apart for scheduling reasons. Thankfully not in the middle of an adventure or anything. And then my next game was, I think, a pretty disastrous, but pretty long running campaign of 3.5e.
Why disastrous?
Because none of us wanted the same thing out of it.
Gotcha.
We all wanted very different things. And I think none of us wanted to be playing D&D 3.5e.
So can you give me an idea a little bit, Addison, of kind of like the disparity? Like, can you give me an example of what you were looking for in the game and how that contradicted somebody else?
Several people wanted it to be more like epic fantasy, more closer to something like, the Elder Scrolls or something like that. Whereas I wanted it to be more grounded. I always wanted it to be more realistic and historically accurate. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't want elves or dwarves. That means that I wanted more like, I wanted more like, proportional sizes of weaponry and believable weights to weaponry.
Mm-hmm.
And a bit more like historically accurate and therefore a bit more granular, like combat rules. Like I wanted a sword to be worse against plate armor than a mace, because maces and hammers are designed to combat heavy armor and swords are not historically.
Right.
I found out much, much later that what I really wanted was Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition, because the first 2 editions of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons are all about that. And they do have like different modifiers for swords versus plate armor compared to maces versus plate armor.
Now, generally speaking, Addison, are you drawn to that level of crunch and simulation?
Yes, I am.
And why is that?
As long as it's somewhat elegant. It needs to be functional, because the other thing about a tabletop RPG versus a computer game is you have to do all the math yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So if a game gets too simulational, it can still be a problem. It starts to just break down because you can't do that math fast enough. So
you need kind of that sweet spot, it sounds like.
Correct. And that's something I tried to aim for with Eureka.
Right. And so the second one's a disaster because of, it sounds like a failure at the beginning, right? Where you didn't sit down maybe for a session 0 and say, here's kind of what we're going to do.
0.
Right.
And also, I want to also note, I think none of us had read all the rules.
Right.
Because we were all just told, and so we were all just telling. A lot of my friends talk about something called the Dungeons and Dragons oral tradition.
Yep.
And it is very much a real thing where maybe most people never read the rule book. They just get told how to play. And that can lead to all sorts of variations of Dungeons and Dragons.
It definitely does. And I think that's a function of several things, right? So it's a function of, it is a big rule set. And, you know, the percentage of people that play D&D that have actually read D&D is small. And that's okay. I mean, what matters is having fun at the table. But when you have a huge barrier and such a huge set of rules, there's a certain level of discouragement there that generates, I think, that oral tradition. So that makes a ton of sense. So that game falls apart for obvious reasons. You don't quit the hobby, though. Why is that? Why do you keep going?
I didn't quit the hobby, but I was out of the playing part of the hobby for some time.
And what brought you back?
I think the next game I played, it was with Brandon. Brandon being actually, well, no, his name is on the rule book. But anyway, Brandon is my partner in the company. He game mastered. This was 2016 or 17. He game mastered some Trail of Cthulhu for me and some friends, and that is a like Lovecraftian take on the Gumshoe system.
Yep.
And that was just really good, especially because he's a good game master. Although, like, that's something that like I was still a bit dissatisfied with it, much in the same way I was a bit dissatisfied with Dungeons and Dragons 3.5e.
How so?
And it was scary, and a lot of that can be owed to Brandon, but it wasn't that great at doing the actual investigation. The players had to bear and carry a lot of that themselves. And by players, I mean including the game master.
Okay.
And similarly,
and do you think that's something distinct to the Gumshoe system, that puts too much burden on the players and the GM for the investigative piece? Or is that indicative of most games like Call of Cthulhu and so on and so forth?
Call of Cthulhu has a similar but different problem where it puts most of the investigation onto the character without a lot of input from the player. Obviously, it's because in Call of Cthulhu, it is a lot more gated behind the dice rolls, whether a character finds an item or not, or if they find a clue or find what they need to find when they're investigating. And I think that's worse. That's worse than what Gumshoe does. Gumshoe was made to be investigation first, whereas Call of Cthulhu was kind of made to be horror first, and it just happens to be investigation-y. But then you come to a situation where there's not really any game that does it to what I wanted, does investigation the way I wanted.
So let's dig into that a little bit, Addison. What exactly does that mean? What were you looking for that you didn't get from Trail?
Something in between those, where there are, I guess I was looking for Eureka, but something in between those where the clue is never going to be like hard locked behind a dice roll that can be failed, but it still is very, very much based on the investigator's initiative rather than, walking into a room and rolling perception.
So with the Gumshoe system, I think Robin D. Laws would argue that solves for that, but it sounds like you didn't think it did, right? I understand the idea that some GMs will hide clues behind a roll with Call of Cthulhu. Not all do, but it's tempting to do that. And, Robin D. Laws, when he created Gumshoe, that was a problem that he saw in basic role playing that he wanted to fix. And I think that led to the Gumshoe system where there isn't clues hidden behind rolls. But you made it sound like that they were still hidden in Trail?
Oh, no.
Okay.
It is that, and that I agree with that philosophy. Eureka does not have a perception skill. It does have a senses skill, but it's for something very specific.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically only used in combat. But for investigation, there's no perception skill. If it's visible to the characters when they enter the room, it is described by the game master. And if it's something that's like hidden behind a couch or a table, if the character goes and looks under that table, it is described by the game master. There's no roll. And Gumshoe is just like that as well, and I think that's good.
Gotcha.
The issue with Gumshoe, and I don't think it's an issue with Gumshoe, like I hate Gumshoe. It is it is just a bit too light, and this can, that's just a preference of mine as well. It's a bit too light, and it doesn't have a lot of mechanics relating to that.
Okay.
And which means that it relies a lot on a player's knowledge, more so than a character's knowledge.
Can you give me an example of how that works in Gumshoe? So where would we see a player's knowledge failing in Gumshoe?
I should also note that I haven't played this in like 7 years.
Yeah, but we're talking theory here. So yeah, but I understand what you're saying. But I'm trying to get my arms around, the thought, because obviously this leads us to Eureka. So I need to understand this first, if that's okay.
I guess maybe I should just say how it works in Eureka.
Sure.
And work backwards from that.
That sounds great.
Because I'm having trouble putting into words how it works in Gumshoe, or coming up with an example of it.
Sure.
In Gumshoe. So Eureka has a lot of skills, and I think it has 21 of them, and most of them can be used for investigation. There's no investigation skill. All the skills are investigation skills.
Okay.
So if a character is looking at a dead body, trying to determine the cause of death, maybe, they can look at the wound, and obviously the game master would have already described that there's a wound.
Mm-hmm.
And in Gumshoe, you probably would have to be like, it's a gunshot wound, or it looks like a knife wound, or something, or the game master would have to describe it, and then the players would have to come to that conclusion, at least from my memory of that.
Yeah, it's a little bit different, but that's definitely one way to run it. So let's talk about how it's done in Eureka.
How it's done in Eureka is that you would roll the dice upon having the character examine it with a goal in mind of trying to determine what kind of wound is this. And that might be the medicine skill. If you think it might be a firearm wound, it could use the firearm skill, because that governs not just the use of firearms, but the knowledge of them.
Sure.
And
is that a pass fail roll?
It's a pass, partial success, and fail.
Okay.
So three different options.
All right. So let's set the scenario then, so I can understand this, Addison. So my character goes, I find a body. You describe to me, there's a large wound on the torso of this body. I say, okay, great.
Correct.
I want to investigate this.
Right.
And you tell me which skill, or I tell you what skill.
Could go either way.
Okay. So we determine I'm going to use, is there like a biology or physiology or anything like that,
medicine.
or forensics? Medicine.
No.
So say I want to use my medicine skill.
Right.
And now there's 3 multiverses that happen. Let's start with my success. What happens when I succeed?
I, as the game master, would probably tell you quite a lot about that wound. Information that would probably be determinable if someone who knew a lot about the human body and how it reacts to gunshot wounds was looking at it, such as you might be able to tell, number one, that it is a gunshot wound.
Mm-hmm.
You might be able to tell that might even be able to tell the caliber, or even the distance within reason, the distance from the shooter to the target.
So quick question on that then. Does the value of my skill matter in this, or is it only matter that I rolled and succeeded, right? Because I could potentially have a low medicine and succeed, or I could have a high medicine and succeed. Does that change anything?
That does not change anything. Although,
Gotcha.
Of course, the level of the skill will determine how likely the character is to succeed.
It determines the likelihood of a success, but I got you. Okay. All right.
Right.
So I succeed. I get all the information. Partial success, I assume I get some of the information, but not as much as if I had succeeded.
I'd probably, with a partial success, I would probably just say to confirm that it is a gunshot wound.
Gotcha. And if I fail,
the character can probably not really figure out anything else besides the basic description that was already given of the wound.
All right. So that helps me a ton. So what's different between that and, say, a Call of Cthulhu, depending on how you run Call of Cthulhu, is, Call of Cthulhu tends to be a binary result. Sounds like you have 3 potential results here, including, a mixed success or a small success. But we go back to the complaint about Call of Cthulhu saying, we're hiding clues behind rolls. I'm still not clear how Eureka's not hiding it behind a roll if I fail.
Because Because first of all, Eureka is not, and of course this is something that I don't think Call of Cthulhu tells you to do, but it's the way I've seen it run a lot of times. Call of Cthulhu is not hiding the fact that there is a wound on the body behind a roll.
Okay.
It's not hiding the fact that there are scratch marks or footprints on the rug behind a roll. It is going to tell the players there are footprints on the rug, and they go this way or that way. When it comes to hiding the information, such as the specific information, the extra details about the caliber or like that, that is only at most temporarily locked behind a roll because of the investigation point and Eureka system in Eureka. Eureka system being a mechanic in the game. That is that when characters make checks to investigate, they gain investigation points. And they gain more points if they fail than if they succeed.
Oh, okay. A little fail forward action. Okay.
It's not quite fail forward. There was another word I used for it. I'd say a partial success on anything is a fail forward in Eureka, but it's more, I think I called it a rubber band system.
Okay.
Whereby failing enough stretches it out and increases the tension and then can be used to slingshot you forward.
Got it.
When the
How do I spend these points? So let's say that I fail now and I've gathered enough of these points. What happens?
So by default, it is 15 points to gain one Eureka. And a Eureka can be spent on a variety of things depending on certain situations. But the first and foremost thing is to retroactively unfail a failed or partial succeeded investigation roll.
And how far back can I go with that?
You can go like as far back as the beginning of the adventure.
Gotcha. So it could be 4 days later. I investigated this body. I failed my roll. And, I just know that there was a wound. Maybe was able to suss out it was a gunshot wound, but he didn't get any more details. 2 days later, I've got enough Eureka points. I could spend them and go, I want to know more about the gunshot wound I looked at 2 days ago. Does that sound right?
Yes. Your character has a Eureka moment.
Got it.
Because the character is putting the pieces together on their own with their own set of knowledge.
Okay, so that's interesting to me, Addison. So it's not a situation where we're rewriting history. It's the idea of Craig looked at this wound and has been stewing on it for 2 days. And just has this Eureka moment where you go, wait a second. I bet you that was a 35 caliber because of this, this, and this. And there's 2 days of thinking about it and 2 days of seeing other shit. Now I have a Eureka moment. Does that sound
good
for the fiction?
Exactly how it works.
Got it. Okay, perfect. So yeah, that does. Now I see where we're differentiating it from, say, Gumshoe. Because investigative points can be spent to get more and more information, the way you said about partial and full successes. But what's unique here is this idea of building up this Eureka pool and being able to spend that to kind of really have one of those, oh, wait a second. And the red strings all start connecting.
Exactly.
Gotcha. That's very cool. So guys, the Insider Insight series allows me to sit down with designers, developers, writers, artists, and creators and learn how they approach their work. Try to understand their process, inspiration, and the methods for crafting their creations. We're going to do that more, talking about Eureka on the other side of this break. We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, this is Zoe, co-host of the Maniculum podcast, here to tell you about our new Kickstarter project, launching June 1st of this year. The Marginal Worlds Kickstarter is a deck of 50 easy-to-play magic items pulled directly from medieval manuscripts that you can play in any TTRPG. So if you're looking to dazzle your players with magic items once hidden for centuries in ancient tomes, sign up on Kickstarter or themaniculumpodcast.com to check out sample cards, playtest them yourself, and bring the magic to your table on June 1st.
So, Addison, we talked a little bit before the break, around one of the things that makes Eureka unique. I want to give everybody a little bit of a blurb so that they can understand the game, and then we're going to kind of dig into really where this game came from and where some of those ideas were born from. So, Eureka is a neo-noir investigation-focused RPG with a supernatural twist. Eureka supports investigation, so searching for clues is on a granular, player-driven process that doesn't grind the game to a halt after one single failed investigative check. Players can be mundane humans or monstrous characters. Monster PCs have strengths and weaknesses that a player must deal with while keeping their true nature a secret from their character and the other players. All right. So, Addison, let's go. There was the first day that you started to say, you know what, it sounds like you're looking for solving a problem that you were seeing in Trail, maybe seeing in other investigative games, and you're thinking, maybe this needs to be solved and I might be the person to do it. Can you give me an idea what that acorn looks like? So when did this itch start to grow and you needed to scratch it?
Well, we actually joke a lot about every single, because Anim has more than one game project, but Eureka is the only one we're like publishing and publicizing right now. We like to joke about every Anim project being fueled entirely by spite, which is not true. I actually do like Call of Cthulhu, and Gumshoe. I had great times with them. Because in the blurb you mentioned the supernatural twist, the monsters. That is something where I can talk about something I really didn't like and how it pushed me into a certain. Because I already discussed, some of the ideas, some of the small shortcomings I found with Call of Cthulhu and Gumshoe and Trail of Cthulhu. This is a shortcoming of a lot of other games that deal with like player characters that are monsters. And that is that I feel like they never go far enough. And that is a real driving force behind Eureka, and it is going all the way with that.
Can you dig into that a little bit more for me? So let's start with an example of a game that you didn't think went far enough.
Okay, so about 2018 or 19, I was introduced to Monster of the Week, and I was given, the rundown of what it is and stuff. And we got to like reading it and playing it and making characters to play it. And I wanted my character to be a vampire. And so because it uses playbooks, which are kind of like classes, but pretty different from the way most games do classes, because like backstory and a lot of personality traits tend to be built into the class rather than just being pure abilities.
Yeah, the playbook is character defining more than a class or anything would be, right? Yeah, so I'm with you.
And
so you wanted to be a vampire.
Right. Or I didn't want to be a vampire. I wanted my character to be a vampire.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah. That's actually a little thing that Eureka does as well, is that it never refers to the player characters as the players. It really wants to draw a separation between them for a bunch of reasons. One of the reasons is that we want them to occasionally kind of go at each other. And we don't want anyone's feelings getting hurt in real life about that. I wanted my character to be a vampire. And there's a playbook called The Monstrous that is meant for playing monsters. And like, it's probably one of the more customizable ones in the game. You're supposed to be able to make, whatever kind of monster you want. But in practice, I think I remember I had to like pick between a weakness to silver and a weakness to sunlight. Couldn't have both, rules as written. And I was like, well, that's no good. I wanted them both for my character. That goes, I tend to think of Powered by the Apocalypse games to be pretty restrictive in that regard in general, and Eureka does try to be very unrestricted with its character creation. But I would also
imagine that PBTA games for you aren't granular and crunchy enough. Would that be fair?
No, not at all. That's another thing. Like, this was my first introduction to Powered by the Apocalypse. And I just kept wanting it to be, particularly with like the monster stuff, I wanted it to be a problem that my character was a vampire, and there wasn't a lot of mechanics for that because, again, had to pick between two different weaknesses that a vampire should have both, and probably like 50 more. And so it didn't really, it was a lot of, in order to play it like I wanted, there had to be a lot of that picked up by the players and game master rather than by the engine of the game itself handling that kind of stuff. And
so you've got Trail, you got Call of Cthulhu, you've got Monsters of the Week, and none of these are scratching. They're not giving you the type of experience you're looking for. What I want to try to get a sense of, Addison, is that happens to a lot of us, right? Where we look for games and games aren't really doing anything and we just keep looking or we move to something else. That's not what you did, though. I'm trying to get a sense of where or when or why the decision of I'm going to solve this problem. Where does that come from and when does that happen?
It was when Brandon asked me to join the team for Eureka. I don't even think it was called Eureka at the time. This was late 2021. And I was asked to join a playtest for what would become Eureka. Cause he started the idea himself, without my involvement initially. I said yes. And I started reading the rule book or, what was just at the time kind of like a very loose PDF. I was like, Brandon, this game seems like it's going to lead into a good number of violent situations, but it doesn't have a combat system at all. I was like, do you want me to write you up one real fast? And he said yes. And then I did. And he liked it. It worked really well. And then I was kind of on the team. And we were both writing on this game.
Now, had he already solved for the frustrations you were having with other investigative games?
Yes.
And the only missing piece. Okay. Gotcha. And you were happy with those as written when you first saw it?
They've been tweaked and changed quite a lot since.
Gotcha.
They've been tweaked and changed quite a lot since. But yes, the idea of the investigation points and Eureka points was there already.
Gotcha.
I've got to talk about that first playtest because it added another thing to the game. Because I should preface this with saying that I'm also a writer, and I deliberately held off on publishing certain things. So I'm not a published author at the moment, but I have written a good deal of vampire fiction. And that means that my friends know that about me. So, and the other people that were going to be a part of this playtest did not know me, and I did not know them. The only person I knew was Brandon, who was going to be the game master. And so I said to Brandon, would it be, because there was already supposed to be somewhat of a supernatural element to this game, even though playing as monster characters was not a thing yet. So I said, Brandon, is it okay if I make my character a vampire and not tell the others? Because I thought that would be the funniest thing ever, and just overall be very interesting. And he said yes. So I set to work on doing that, and I had to write up vampire rules for this game as well, and I made them exactly as granular and as pain in the butt for the player and the vampire character as possible. Because to me, that's the most interesting thing, is for it to be a unique challenge for the character. That does come along with great power, but it's not just an overpowered class or character trait. And I introduced the character to the party and players. At the time, she was being called Elise. She was a petite Cajun French woman who to everyone else just seemed like a little weird, a little quirky, with not a hint of vampirism about her in their eyes, despite the fact that it could not have been more obvious the entire time. And I actually wrote down some of this stuff because I thought this might come up. This whole campaign, this was a 6-month-long campaign, probably the longest we've ever done in Eureka. Like I said, it really couldn't have been more obvious, but they never figured it out. The characters didn't figure it out. The players didn't figure it out. It wasn't until a month after it ended that I told the players. and there were all the signs were there. Sunglasses at all times, including indoors and at night. Avoiding all spicy food, particularly garlic and onions. Always covered her mouth when she talked by like scratching her nose or something. Did weird things to avoid mirrors. They never saw her sleep. She was always awake when they went to bed and awake when they woke up. Every time the party was going to go to a residence, she would run ahead or like move ahead in some way to be the one to knock on the door and specifically ask to come in. And it was all these little things that to them just made her a little weird, but were all, of course, related to vampirism.
And that makes sense to me. So question for you. So something that's interesting to me is, you made a point before the break to say, you in this game make a very clear delineation between the character and the player.
Right.
And we have make a clear separation. Yet here you're not.
Am I not?
Here you're not. Here you're saying the characters don't know I'm a vampire, and I'm also going to hide it from the players as well. So I
never said I was a vampire.
I'm sorry?
I didn't say I was a vampire. I just didn't. Maybe there's some miscommunication there.
Sure. Help me out.
I have a character who is a vampire.
Correct.
And she is not telling the party that she's a vampire.
Understood.
And I am not telling the players that she's a vampire.
But do you understand what I'm saying here? There's, if we've got two realms here where there's characters in the world that they exist in, and then players and the players and they exist in, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it sounds based on the blurb in the media packet you sent me that the players will not know if a character in their party is monstrous. Is that fair?
That is correct.
And so do you understand what I'm saying? Where, it's interesting that the mystery or the hidden information of a character is bled over to the players, despite the distinction that we've talked about. Does that make any sense?
That does not make sense.
Okay, well, I'll move along. All right, so you do this for 6 months. They never figure it out. You tell them afterwards. Everybody says, wow, that makes a ton of sense now. What's next then from a design perspective? At what point do you then go, we need to mechanically put this into the game?
Well, immediately, basically.
Okay.
And about the bleed, I don't see it that way whatsoever.
It's your game. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. It may be a bad question. I'm not worried about it.
The player shouldn't be grilling another player about whether the character is a vampire. That's not part of the mystery.
But it's important that they don't know, it sounds like. So
right.
It's important to the game.
Right.
How do you then handle that? How do we then mechanically introduce these monstrous characters? And how do we mechanically enforce the mystery to not only be a mystery within the fiction, but a mystery outside the fiction at the table?
Ultimately, it's okay if the players in real life figure it out.
Got it.
It is discouraged, and there actually are mechanical benefits for them. There's mechanical benefits as long as they don't know, which are maybe the only non-diegetic thing in the game. But ultimately, it's okay if they figure it out.
Gotcha.
That's not the player is encouraged to keep it a secret, both by the rulebook just telling them to keep it a secret, and there being a small bonus for their character, so long as the players don't know. The other players.
Is that bonus only in place if the other characters don't know, or is it only in place if the players don't know, or is it both?
It's only in place if the players don't know.
Got it. Okay.
And it's just it might take actually a little bit too long to explain what the bonus actually is, but it's a small bonus.
I get the idea. Yeah, no, I get the idea. All right. So it sounds like the combat system was something that you were able to introduce. And then we added these monstrous creatures. From a playtest perspective, after that playtest, was there anything else that came up during playtesting that had an impact on the design of the game?
I'd probably say a lot of small things.
Can you give me some examples?
Pretty recently, someone who was playing it in the tabletop RPG book club that Anim runs, which that's about self-explanatory as to what that is. We nominate, then vote on a game, and then there's like 100 people in that server, and we all split into groups and play it, and we all play the same adventure module, come back to discuss. Was playing it because it won a round, and one issue that they brought up was that at the time, what items a character could start with was just sort of like whatever, just whatever items, and that was fine the way that we in our own group was playing it ultimately, but pretty similar to how I mentioned in Monster of the Week that a lot of the interesting stuff fell to the stuff that I found interesting fell to the players and game master to like come up with on their own and deal with on their own. It was a bit loosey-goosey. And it worked fine for us because we knew how it was supposed to go. But because there weren't rules for it, that meant that when this got into the hands of a customer and another group, they wouldn't know what to do with it, and they'd have to go on their own and come up with how to fix it and work with it on their own. So I immediately got to work on figuring out how to, without adding a granular money, like a dollar amount that each character has, do some kind of wealth system. And then I wrote the wealth mechanics.
How does that work?
Well, each character has a wealth skill. It is a skill similar to
Call of Cthulhu.
Any other like firearm skill or any other skill in the game. It is somewhat similar to the way Call of Cthulhu does it with like credit rating, I think.
Right.
And it's a skill, and it can be used for investigation as well, just like any other skill. If it's something that, only being really rich would let you figure out, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It can also be reversed. So there's the situation where if it's like a -3, and it's something that only somebody who's been homeless before might figure out, that -3 becomes a +3 for this roll. And then the way that works in character creation is that it adds to a system that we call WP, or wealth points, which is it's the only dice roll in character creation. You roll some dice, and the wealth skill factors in as a modifier for it. There's other modifiers as well, but it results in a number of wealth points, which are separate from the wealth skill. Got it. And there's a big list of items, and each item costs X number of wealth points. And that is how starting items work in the game. And I had a lot of fun with that because it is a really not exactly punitive, but it's a pretty strict and stingy system that's going to make the players have to make some really hard choices between what they're going to give their character. And before this, I think just about every single character that was made owned a gun. And that's because the players knew that there might be some kind of supernatural scary monster they would have to defeat at the end. And after the wealth point system is implemented, it's actually kind of hard to own a gun. For a character to own a gun starting out in the game. And a gun is something extremely powerful in Eureka. This is not a game that expects like player characters to be able to get shot and keep going. Getting shot once in this game is almost always debilitating. So, it's somewhat gated such powerful items, and makes them either something that you kind of get lucky and you can give your character because you got a really high roll in that initial roll, or you have to sacrifice something else. And often, at least for the investigation part, a gun's not always that helpful compared to like a flashlight or a car. And
well, so it sounds like you created a nice point buy system, right? To handle kind of the starting equipment. So, you guys have been working on this for several years now, but now we've made a decision to crowdfund it. And I'd like to get an idea of what was the breaking point? When did you turn the corner enough that you then said, it's time to get this out here and get some funds so we can finish it and put it out? What happened to make you turn that corner and make that decision?
Creating a game like this is a whole lot of making that decision and then realizing you're wrong and having to go back.
So how did you know this time you weren't wrong?
Well, we originally wanted to launch this Kickstarter in June of 2023. And then that just wasn't happening. And then we wanted to launch it in
why is that?
It was because we had no idea what we were doing, because this is our first time being a business and stuff. We weren't ready. The game wasn't ready. It was too raw and we were too green.
So what happened in a year then? Give me an idea of what you guys did to solve for that to be ready.
Got an editor. We didn't get an editor until like December or November of last year though. But that's probably one of the biggest things. We also got a bit of an audience. It's been play tested more. We went public with it in like August or September of 2023, and like started really like spreading it around to strangers, not just our friends. More people get to play it. We get a little bit of funding through Patreon. With that funding, we're able to do a little bit of advertising, stuff like that. It's the fact that I guess and then also we have an editor. We have someone who is going through with me every Tuesday and Wednesday, and we're scrolling through the rule book on Google Docs, and she is saying, you have to cut this paragraph. It is useless and confusing to the reader. And ultimately, this is making the game a lot better and shorter. Because I think a lot of people are like this, but I'm pretty long-winded when I write if I don't have anyone to rein me in. I'll repeat a lot of things, or I'll forget that I already said that like 10 pages ago, and I'll throw in like that.
Editors, Addison, are the unsung heroes of TTRPG worlds.
Absolutely.
And they will make or break a game. So I think that was a very smart move on your part. So as we're talking now, we're recording this before the crowdfunding starts, but we're releasing it while the crowdfunding is happening. Can we give everybody listening an idea of how baked this game is? So when the campaign finishes, we assume you're funded, you're off and running. What's left to do before people get it in their hands? Is the game baked and it's just production at that point, or
the game needs to be finished editing? There's several things that need to be finished about the rule book, and that is all of the rules are there. I just need to finish going through it with the editor, like page by page. Right now, we're about 100 pages in. This is going to sound like a lot, but it's actually much less than this, because the way it's laid out right now, and if you look at like there's like free demos and pre-release copies going around from like our Patreon and stuff. Those are a bit messy, and they're a bit like bulky and big, because a lot of stuff is going to be a lot smaller, or it's going to be formatted more tightly in the final product. But right now it's all like laid all the way out in really big font with a lot of spacing and stuff. So it's, I think the rule book says it's like 590 pages right now. It's going to be more like 300 in the end.
Yeah, the other unsung heroes are the layout people. So I understand. Right. Yeah.
The other thing I need to do, I need to finally finish these. I kind of overpromised, I'd say, with the examples of play, because I think that examples of play are good to have in a game, and I like set a bunch of them to be in the rule book, but then that means I have to write them all, and I've got like 7 more to do. And like other things keep taking priority over them, which is fine because the game is not released yet. With the exception of copy editing, we also have, so copy editing, finish the examples of play, copy edit those, make sure they aren't completely misleading the player or reader because I like forgot a rule somewhere. And the art, the game needs more art, and that's like what probably like 80% of the Kickstarter money is going to. The game just needs more art in general. We do have the Snoops, which you may have seen in the Google Doc I sent you. We have plenty of those, but we need plenty more. We also have 2 artists ready to go for a bit more detailed art, and but they're skilled and they're not cheap.
That's a good thing, right?
And we don't want to underpay them either.
No, you definitely don't want to. You're gonna get what you pay for when it comes to that.
Right.
So I think we got a clear sense, really, what the problems this game is trying to solve. Really got a sense of how we got where we are and when you came onto the team. What we're going to do is we're going to take one more break. When we get back from this break, we're going to find out what Addison's been grooving on. We'll be right back. This is the part of many podcasts where someone comes on, interrupts the show, and explains that you should consider paying for the content that you're listening to right now for free. That pitchman explains by giving $1 or more a month, you not only support the show, but you allow the show to grow and improve. Here on the third floor, we refuse to interrupt your episode of Tabletop Talk with such time-wasting pleas. We pledge never to run a spot asking you to go to patreon.com and give $1 or more a month, because supporting content creators keeps the content coming, even if there is a link in the show's description. And there is. We don't ask you to click it and become a patron. We don't waste time rambling about the benefits like early access to episodes, getting episodes without ad breaks like this, or even getting a chance to play in one of Craig's RPG sessions. Anyway, enjoy this episode knowing Tabletop Talk, despite being supported by its patrons, won't engage in such blatant appeals for support. So Addison, one of the things I like to do when I talk to creators is not only get an idea of their creative process and how they get from nothing to something, which is what we covered in the first 2 segments. I'll also like to get an idea of what inspires them. So has there been a book, a game, a video game, prestige TV, or a movie recently that really kind of knocked your socks off and you just couldn't stop thinking about?
Well, this is not exactly super recent, but I just finished Metal Gear Solid 2 for the first time.
Metal Gear Solid 2, very nice. What got you to start playing it?
Well, I had played several Metal Gear Solid games, just interspersed because they were cool games and they were accessible to me. But I had never played 1, 2, or 4 because I never owned a PlayStation.
Okay.
And so 3, Peace Walker, and 5 were released on different consoles. But 1, 2, and 4 were a lot harder to get if you don't own a PlayStation. And it works out kind of fine because all the ones that were released on other consoles were prequels. And then, so it's a little bit like watching the Star Wars prequels before you watch the original trilogy.
Sure.
But that's a way you can watch them. And you won't lose too much from doing that.
So I guess my first question then, Addison, is what was it about the ones you had played that made you want to play 2? So obviously you had a good enough experience with the other ones that you wanted to play more, and I'd like to get an idea what that was.
Man, there's nothing like them. They're very well written in the plot and story. They have very interesting characters. They tend to be very fun. Just they're fun games to play, fun video games. And then they also kind of, on all those fronts, take it to a somewhat elevated level, because they're one of those game series that is not only well written and well made, but is, I think, not afraid to be a video game.
What's that mean?
Because just in contrast to a lot of other video games, for example, like, let's see, the cutscenes that tell you the story will be almost like a separate movie that you watch in between segments of gameplay, and that the cutscenes in the Metal Gear Solid game are interactive. It's like they sometimes are interactive, but the way the story's written, it tends to make the gameplay a lot more plausible within the story that the cutscenes are telling. It's really hard to explain.
I get an idea what you're saying. There's a bleed there, right? Where the cutscenes matter and the gameplay matters, and how they interact with each other. So after playing Solid Gear 2, what was your big takeaway? What did you see happening in that version of the game that you hadn't seen before?
I have to avoid spoiling the entire story for
sure
all your listeners, even though a lot of people have definitely played this before. But
well, let's do it this way. For those of you that haven't played it and don't want it to be spoiled, you can fast forward. And now we're in spoiler territory. So what worked for you?
The entire game, the entire story up to the end is fake. It is not all a dream, and it's not like a computer simulation, but it is a fake simulated exercise. And then it tricks you with that like 3 times. It is there's a group called the Patriots that are like the Illuminati, that you find out even exist in this game for the first time. And so in the beginning of the game, you're given this mission, rescue the president. And he's being held by terrorists on this offshore platform. And the more you sneak through and covert ops go through this, run into characters, it's very much like a spy movie. Something's up. Something's not right about the mission. You don't have all the information. And then it comes out near the end that this is all a big farce, even though the bullets were real and the people that died were real. This is all a big organized thing that was set in motion in order to test and prove that your character, the protagonist, is and can be made into like a super spy. And then that's not true either. Because it turned out, because then like half an hour later, they're like, why would we, the Illuminati who control entire armies, need one super spy? The actual purpose of this whole ordeal was to prove that we could make it happen, and then prove that we could cover it up. And we proved it. And no one will ever believe this. So this was an experiment to like test how well they really control the media and everything. And that's a bit of an oversimplified version of the plot, but that was there's been lots and lots of movies and video games that have done a story like that, and they're probably influenced by this game, and a lot of them fall flat because I don't know, they're too obsessed with the punchline and don't give enough meat to the setup. If you want to structure it like a joke, setup and punchline,
sure.
This has the setup and the payoff of the big twists.
That's cool. That's cool. So it sounds like they walked a pretty tight rope, but were able to get across and kept you in it the whole time.
Yes.
That's cool. That's cool. So Addison, there's a lot of really fun things to do on a Monday night, like play Metal Gear Solid 2, but yet you decided to spend an hour with me, and I want you to know how much I appreciate it.
I appreciate it too.
And for those of you listening, this is the end. You made it. Thanks for listening. Take care. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tabletop Talk. A big thank you to Addison for joining me today. You can find out more about their work at animttrpgs.neocities.org. What game do you think handles investigations the best? I really would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, or drop me a line at admin@thirdfloorwars.com. And don't worry, all of those links are in the show notes. Now, you could do me a favor and hit that subscribe button or leave me a rating. And I bet one of your friends would really enjoy this discussion. So do you mind sharing it with them? You do not want to miss the next episode. I talk with Joel Verktenhill about their game Stars and City, plus a few others. Happy gaming, my friend. Hey, you know that thing you've been thinking about? That thing you wanted to work on, that game or that drawing or that novel? Well, you're done listening to this podcast, and there's no better day than today to create. Oh, hey, are you still here? Wow. Well, the episode is over, but if you're bored, why not go to patreon.com and support the show for as little as $1 a month? Yeah, you can just scroll down and get the link. It's Patreon that makes this and all of our other content possible. Don't you want to join the other floorheads on the Patreon Discord? Anyway, thanks for sticking around. Take care. Bye.